In France, a nation celebrated for its rich history, culture, and commitment to liberty, equality, and fraternity, there exists a paradox that has long been a subject of debate and discussion. On the surface, the French Republic proudly proclaims its commitment to the principles of universalism and the idea that all citizens are equal, irrespective of their race, religion, or ethnicity. This notion is deeply embedded in the French psyche, and it has historically been used to assert that there is no racism or color in the country. However, beneath this facade of egalitarianism lies a more complex and deeply ingrained reality, one that is far from colorblind. For many, the assertion that France is free from racism or color discrimination seems like a denial of an evident truth. Discrimination and racial disparities persist in French society, affecting people of African and Afro-Caribbean descent, often referred to as Black people in the context of this discussion. These individuals regularly face challenges that have become a part of their daily lives, challenging the idea of a colorblind society. In this video, we will take a look at Black lives in France, how being Black affects their everyday life in education, labor, politics, and even social events, and how France turns a blind eye to this problem, further aggravating the issue. Before we get right into the video, please smash the like button and subscribe to the channel to keep informed of our eye-opening Black narrative. The involvement of France in the transatlantic slave trade and the establishment of colonial outposts in the Caribbean marked the beginning of Black people's presence in French history. In the 17th century, French colonists established plantations on islands such as Haiti, Guadeloupe, and Martinique. African slaves were forcibly brought to these colonies to toil on sugar, coffee, and tobacco plantations, subjected to dehumanizing conditions and cruelty. This system of brutal exploitation left an enduring impact on both the enslaved Africans and the societies in which they lived. France played a significant role in the transatlantic slave trade, which saw millions of Africans transported to the Americas as slaves. The triangular trade connected France with Africa and the Americas, as it did with many European colonial powers. The demand for slaves in the French colonies was driven by the profitability of sugar and other cash crops. Slavery in these colonies was brutal, with harsh labor conditions, widespread disease, and severe punishments. The resilience and resistance of enslaved Black people were integral to the formation of their cultural identity and the eventual push for emancipation. When slavery was abolished, France turned to colonization. France's colonial ambitions extended beyond the Caribbean to the African continent, with colonies in West Africa, including Senegal and Ivory Coast. Colonial rule was characterized by policies of assimilation and association, ostensibly aimed at integrating the colonies into the French Republic. In the present day, France is home to a diverse population, including people of African and Afro-Caribbean descent. However, issues of racism and discrimination persist, often challenging the country's commitment to its universalist ideals. France has traditionally adhered to a colorblind approach, emphasizing the principle of equality for all citizens regardless of their racial or ethnic background. However, critics argue that this approach overlooks the specific challenges faced by Black communities. Racism remains a pressing issue in France, with Black individuals and communities experiencing discrimination in various aspects of life. Employment, education, housing, and interactions with law enforcement are all arenas where racial disparities persist. High-profile incidents of police brutality and racial profiling have triggered protests and ignited discussions about systemic racism in the country. In France, disparities in educational opportunities and outcomes persist among students of different racial and ethnic backgrounds. being black places you in the minority. Many minority students, including those of African descent, attend schools in disadvantaged neighborhoods with limited resources and poorly maintained facilities. These schools often lack the necessary resources, such as experienced teachers, updated materials, and extracurricular activities that are essential for a quality education. As a result, students in these schools may have fewer opportunities for academic and personal growth. The French educational system historically employed a tracking system, which often sorted students into different tracks based on their perceived academic potential. This system, while meant to offer specialized education, sometimes disproportionately placed minority students in lower tracks, limiting their access to advanced coursework and opportunities for academic enrichment. The dropout rate among minority students, including those of African descent, is higher than the national average. Factors such as a lack of support, a sense of hopelessness, and inadequate academic preparation can contribute to high dropout rates, limiting students' access to higher education and future career opportunities. The statistics are worse for Black people when looking at policing and racial profiling. The relationship between law enforcement and Black communities in France has been marred by allegations of racial profiling and police brutality. There are many incidents, both recent and in the past, that reveal the harsh reality of being Black in France. In 2005, the deaths of Ziad Benna and Baouna Traoré, two teenagers of African descent, sparked riots in the suburbs of Paris. The boys were electrocuted while hiding in an electrical substation to avoid a police identity check. The incident raised questions about police conduct and the treatment of minority youth in disadvantaged neighborhoods. There was also the death of Lamine Dieng. Lamine Dieng was an immigrant from Senegal who died in police custody in 2007. His death was attributed to asphyxiation, and it raised concerns about the use of force by law enforcement officers and the need for accountability. In 2018, it was the death of Abubakar Fofana. Abubakar Fofana, a young man of Malian descent, died while in police custody in 2018. His death, along with allegations of police violence, sparked protests and calls for justice. In 2023, a 17-year-old delivery driver with North African roots was shot and killed by a police officer in a Paris suburb. The death unleashed tensions between angry residents, setting barricades on fire and police firing tear gas. In many of these cases, there have been allegations of inadequate investigations and a lack of accountability for law enforcement officers involved. Families and activists have called for independent investigations to ensure a fair and transparent process. Racial profiling by law enforcement is a persistent issue in France. Many individuals from Black and minority backgrounds report being disproportionately targeted by police for identity checks. Critics argue that these checks are often conducted based on appearance rather than reasonable suspicion, leading to feelings of harassment and discrimination. France has faced criticism for implementing stop and frisk policies known as contrôle d'identité, or identity checks, that disproportionately target Black and minority individuals. Critics argue that these policies contribute to racial profiling and have called for their reform or abolition. In response to these issues, there have been calls for police reform in France. This includes demands for improved training, oversight, and accountability mechanisms to address racial profiling and police misconduct. Some also advocate for community policing initiatives to build trust between law enforcement and minority communities. However, Black people shouldn't expect change anytime soon. In France, being Black is a tough time for entrepreneurs. Black tech entrepreneurs like Shaila Sahai say pitching investors is usually an uphill battle. She is a woman, Black and a CEO, And when she walks into a meeting with investors, armed with a slide deck for her fintech startup We Take Part, she's often greeted with bafflement. Being a black woman and a CEO usually comes as a surprise. In most cases, it ends with words like, "Oh, okay, nice, very interesting, thank you. See you soon." And this can happen in the middle of a conversation. For black entrepreneurs, getting investors is never easy simply due to the color of their skin, she says. In France, Sahai isn't alone in facing this almost systemic avoidance of people who look like her, but you wouldn't be able to find any proof of it. The French startup ecosystem for black founders is shrouded in mystery, especially because France's embrace of universalism and its color-blind approach to economic and social policy has meant that there is little to no data or visibility into the startup and venture capital industry's racial and ethnic diversity. However, personal accounts do paint the reality on the ground. Black entrepreneurs often find themselves at a disadvantage when it comes to accessing funding for their business ventures. This issue is rooted in systemic racism and discrimination. Racial bias can manifest in lending institutions, venture capital firms, and angel investors, making it more challenging for black entrepreneurs to secure loans, investments, or grants. As a result, they may struggle to obtain the financial resources needed to start or grow their businesses. Stereotyping and unconscious bias can play a significant role in the challenges black entrepreneurs face. Negative stereotypes and assumptions about the abilities and prospects of black business owners can hinder their ability to secure funding and investment. Access to networks and connections is crucial in the business world. However, black entrepreneurs find it challenging to access the same networks and opportunities as their non-black counterparts. Discriminatory practices within professional and social networks can limit their access to potential investors and supporters. France, like many countries, faces racial disparities in wealth, with black communities often experiencing lower income levels and limited generational wealth. This economic disparity can make it more difficult for black entrepreneurs to provide the necessary collateral or personal funds required to secure loans or investments. While you might think France has made significant progress, the struggle for recognition in black communities are really not different from what they were in 2013. In February 2013, the Representative Council of France's Black Associations, CRAN, presented to the Assemblée Nationale its second evaluation of the perception and experience of discrimination against black people in France. This survey by the global market research company Ipsos was conducted among a sample of 807 French people representative of the black population or mixed-race population of black descent. The study revealed that 91% of respondents in mainland France answered that they had been victims of racial discrimination often or from time to time, and 85% stated that they had been victims of discrimination based on skin color. The absolute and widespread nature of the phenomenon is particularly striking. And this not only happened in physical spaces, we can see the progression of hateful ideas on the internet and in public debate. The rise of racist speech during the 2022 presidential campaign proved that France is nowhere near dealing with its racist problem that it continues to deny. According to the study, the discrimination occurs largely in the public space, with an indication of up to 41%, and at work with up to 31% of responders affirming to racism in these areas. More than half of the people surveyed have experienced difficulty in getting a job interview because of the color of their skin. Almost as many of them reported unfair treatment in their academic studies, job refusals, or difficulties in buying or renting a house because of their skin color. The study also highlighted the failure of the judicial system to address these issues. Only a quarter of victims filed a complaint with the police or the gendarmerie after having suffered discrimination. The figure is even lower, at 9%, for residents of French overseas departments and regions. The complicated relationship between the inhabitants of these territories and the police can be explained by one figure. 49% said they have been checked by police at least once in the last 12 months, compared to 23% in a representative panel of the entire French population, also polled in the Ipsos study. Despite the prevalence of racial disparities, France has sometimes resisted acknowledging the extent of racial discrimination within its borders. The emphasis on universalism and the reluctance to recognize race as a defining factor in people's experiences has hindered the development of comprehensive policies to address racial inequities. In recent years, there has been a growing focus on addressing racism and fostering diversity in France. Grassroots movements and activism led by the Black community and their allies have played a pivotal role in raising awareness about racial disparities and advocating for change in France. These movements have gained momentum in recent years, igniting discussions about race, racism, and the need for concrete policy changes. The Justice for Adama movement, which emerged in response to the death of Adama Traoré in police custody, has been a prominent force in French activism. Adama Traoré's family has been at the forefront of this movement, demanding justice and accountability for their son's death. Protests, marches, and rallies organized by this movement have drawn significant attention and support. The global Black Lives Matter movement, sparked by the death of George Floyd in the United States, has resonated strongly in France. Protests and rallies in solidarity with the movement have taken place across the country, and activists have used the platform to highlight racial disparities and the urgent need for change in France. Grassroots activists and organizers have harnessed the power of social media to raise awareness about racial disparities, share personal stories, and mobilize supporters. Platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook have been crucial in disseminating information and organizing events. The debate over the visibility of race and the recognition of racial disparities in France continues to be a significant social and political issue. While France may claim to be a colorblind society, the experiences of Black people within the country tell a different story, one characterized by historical legacies and contemporary challenges related to race and discrimination. The history of Black people in France, from the days of slavery and colonization to the challenges of contemporary racism, is a narrative marked by resilience and resistance. The struggles and contributions of Black communities have played a significant role in shaping the nation's identity and culture. While France has espoused universalist ideals, the experiences of Black individuals within the country reveal the persistence of racial disparities and discrimination. Recognizing and addressing racism in France remains an ongoing and complex challenge. The country's commitment to universalism and colorblindness has at times hindered progress in combating systemic racism. However, grassroots movements, activism, and government initiatives are gradually working to bring these issues to the forefront and create a more equitable and inclusive society. This brings us to the end of this video. Tell us what you think in the comments section, as we are always interested in your thoughts. As always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos to let more people know the truth about Blacks and to hear their own part of the narratives. Thanks for watching.